A warm welcome to the World Economic Forum Deutsche Welle debate, coming to you from Bangkok for the first time. Today we'll be talking about tourism and growth. The sector is much bigger than one might think. Estimates show that in 2011, travel and tourism accounted for 9% of GDP and 9% of jobs worldwide. Now, in the coming decade, the biggest growth is expected to be in the Asia-Pacific region. So how can travel and tourism become a force for positive change in Asia and the Pacific, especially in the 10 countries which comprise the Association of Southeast Asian Countries, or ASEAN? To find out, we have an excellent panel for you. Starting with Sebastian Marot, who is the Executive Director from Friends International and is also a social entrepreneur. Gerald Lawless is the Executive Chairman from the Jumeirah Group, United Arab Emirates, and Gerald's also a co-chair of the World Economic Forum East Asia Summit. Now, Mari El Kapangestu is the very dynamic Minister for Creative Economy and Tourism from Indonesia. Then we have S. Ishwaran from Singapore. You're the Minister in the Prime Minister's Cabinet. And finally, we have Masio Favela Luca de Paula, who is an international bureaucrat, and you are the Executive Director at the United Nations World Trade Organization. A very warm welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Now, Masio, your organization has worked out that Asia and Pacific is where the biggest growth is going to take place in the next decade. What explains the strengths of this region?
Well, Amrita, what we have in this region is a combination of extraordinary factors, extraordinary as compared to other regions, but have become normal here. We have very dynamic economies, large populations in the countries, thriving businesses. We have an ICT sector that is, in most countries, that's very important for tourism. Connectivity is getting better and better, infrastructure as well. Travel facilitation is also a very important component in the growth in the future. So it's a combination of factors that indicate to us that this region of the world will really increase its share in international tourism in the next 10, 20 years, coming from 21% today to 30% in international arrivals in 20 years' time.
That's a significant growth. Now, Mari, Indonesia is very keen to increase its number of foreign arrivals. When you were in Berlin earlier this year, you said already in the first quarter of this year, there's been an 11% growth in tourism to Indonesia, and that's even though it's low season. Why is tourism so important for your economy?
It's very important because of its contribution to the economy. It's about 9% contribution to the economy directly and indirectly, and it's creating 1 out of 12 jobs in Indonesia. So that's very similar to the general number that comes out from the UNWTO estimates worldwide. And I think most importantly, it has a huge multiplier effect on our economy. Because it spreads out growth, and the growth is very much focused on the particular tourist destination. So we believe that it has a huge economic impact, but also social impact. And the challenge is, of course, not just to increase the number of tourists, but how to increase the number of quality tourists, both foreign inbound tourists as well as domestic tourists. I think the story about Asia is also a story about domestic tourists. Indonesia has a population of 240 million, out of which 125 million are traveling about twice a year. So that's also a huge market. So how do we do it in a way that, okay, the numbers are going to increase? How do we make sure it's going to be sustainable economically, socially, environmentally, and culturally? You know, you don't lose your traditional culture with the inbound tourism.
Thank you, Mari. Now, Ishwaran, Singapore is ranked number 1 in the World Economic Forum competitive report rankings. It's also the only Asian country which is in the top 10 of tourism worldwide. What is the secret of your success?
Well, I'm not sure about secrets, but I think we have been quite fortunate in terms of a few key factors that have come together. One is external, in the sense that in general there's been a rise in Asia, and in particular the disposable income, the middle class, and certainly those with higher disposable incomes than that. And one of the key things that they seek is travel and new experiences. That's been a beneficial element for us. The second part, I would say, is more internal. We have also developed a whole range of new products and experiences which have repositioned Singapore as a global city with a very diverse set of offerings for tourists who come to Singapore. And I would say the last part, which has really been a key factor regionally, has been the increased connectivity, both in terms of, in general, air and sea and other forms of connectivity, but also specifically the advent of low-cost carriers and their growth. I think all of these factors have come together, and certainly Singapore has benefited from it from the point of view of tourism, but I would say equally many of the regional markets have also benefited from it.
Thank you, Sharon. Now, Sebastian, you have access to grassroots level tourism. You work with your organization Friends International, and you help street children. From your perspective, how do you see the contribution and the role of tourism in the region?
We see it in two angles, really. One is the positive one. It's bringing growth, it's bringing development, so that's only very good for the people, and especially for jobs, because we have a 13% youth unemployment. So this is really a great opportunity to train young people in the tourism industry, to have a market for the products that are created by the grassroots people. So it's a fantastic opportunity. On the other hand, there's a risk linked to this tourism that's growing. It's a risk on resources, but also the risk on the individual children, especially the most vulnerable ones. You have the indirect risk, which is tourism requires clean cities, therefore there are some roundups and cleanups of the street children and undesirable. You have the second risk is what we call the predators. The people are coming in the countries to abuse children. And then the risk of all the tourists who are with good intentions but do all the things that are actually dangerous. So for example, you have a development of orphanage tourism in countries like Cambodia, where people go visit orphanages, take photos and leave, and this is extremely dangerous for the kids and extremely bad. So what's really important is that we find a way to capitalize on this industry, but mitigate the risks that are linked to it. And that's only by working together with the government, with the corporate sector and the NGOs.
Now, completely from the opposite end of the spectrum is Gerald Lawless. Your group is known for its very flashy and luxurious hotels. Sadly, I've never been to one of them. Now, from your perspective, as a luxury brand, what is the philosophy of companies like yours in relation to tourism?
Well, I think first of all, our philosophy is to make a good return on investment. But I think that tourism provides that. And certainly if you use Dubai as an example, which is our home base, so we have hotels in other parts of the world as well, I think we can see that over the years that Dubai has been able to develop a non-oil-based economic activity, whereby tourism can sometimes, with the multiplying factor, probably account for up to 20% of Dubai's GDP. It's also interesting that almost 9 million visitors come to Dubai every year, and yet it's a city of less than 2 million people. And I believe actually that tourism has been extremely beneficial, not only economically, but also socially. And it's made the people who live in Dubai, the national people of the United Arab Emirates, much more aware of their own culture, their own heritage, because of course tourists ask, what is the history of the place? How did it come to be where it is? And that makes people very much more aware and proud of what they have achieved. And the social benefits of tourism generally, with getting people together, interacting with each other, has been incredible. Plus, of course, we've had great benefit within the hotel industry with the development of Emirates Airlines, which has actually created Dubai as a major aviation hub, and now we see Abu Dhabi following in the same direction with Etihad Airlines.
Thank you. Now, obviously, from what you are saying, the potentials in developing tourism and travel are enormous, but there are also obviously challenges. And how we manage this growth and how we actually create systems which lead to long-term sustainability. And we'll be discussing some of those now. Murray, you talked about the great potential and need for tourism in Indonesia, but you also talked about the risks. Now, there's 17,500 islands in Indonesia, only 6,000 are inhabited. Do you really want tourists swarming around all on your beaches and your wonderful forests?
Yeah, this is exactly the challenge. So what we're doing is we have to design our strategy appropriately. You would have destinations which can cater for large numbers, such as Bali, Jakarta, Surabaya, and even Yogyakarta. But you would also have places where you wouldn't want too many people to come. And that's where you would probably have to put limits in terms of numbers, as well as manage the sustainability. And use it as a magnet to go to other regions. You can take an example like Pulau Komodo, where the Komodo dragons are. If you can't have too many people because it disturbs their habitat and which will endanger them, even though it is an icon. But it's a draw card still for people to come to visit their surrounding areas. So I think we need to really focus very much on developing sustainable tourism in the different sites. And apart from the environmental issue, I think the social and cultural issue is very important. I think for the social issue, you've got to really try to develop the tourism destination by including as much as possible the community around it, including the youth and the children, to make sure that the children not to be involved in the tourism, but to have that awareness of the risks, the negative risks. But taking advantage of the positive outcomes means you have to do training, human resource development, and what I don't know what to call it, but how do you procure as much as possible the goods and services for the tourism industry in that particular location locally? In CO2 emission, you have things like carbon miles. So it's a similar concept. Maybe you have carbon miles because if you're procuring as close as possible, you're obviously minimizing the CO2 emission. But maybe we can have social miles. If you're procuring as much as possible locally, you're benefiting the local community, and it will make your tourism more sustainable. You won't have protests against that
Now, that sounds like a very good blueprint for developing tourism in this region. But often these decisions are taken at the national level. But Sebastian, do they actually filter down to the local level?
It depends on it depends on the type of tourist, because tourism is not one group. So you have the ones that are really with the communities and want that interaction, and others who are really not interested and go directly to the temples in a big tour. So the ones that are directly with the communities have a tremendous impact there, positive but also sometimes negative. And this is where the work has to be done, is with those groups.
Now, for Singapore in particular, Ishwaran, managing growth is a huge issue given that how small the country is. What are the lessons that can be learned actually from Singapore as to how to manage this influx of particularly foreign tourists?
I was listening to you describe how many thousand islands Indonesia has.
Exactly.
We would like to have that problem. I think it's a very different, I think the nature of what is sustainable and what the strategy you adopt should be is really a function of your circumstances. We're a city-state. We had 13.2 million visitors last year on a population base that's about 5.5 million. That's a record number. It's been compounding at double-digit rates. The contribution in terms of value add is about $22 billion, Sing dollars. So it's substantial, but clearly you want to shape the direction in a manner that will continue to yield good contributions to the economy, create good jobs, but be developed in a manner that is deemed to be sustainable by the population and in general by the industry. So for us, the challenge really has been to focus on what will emphasize the tourism experience, enhance the visitor experience for those who come to Singapore, and thereby increase the yield, if you like. So it's not just about sheer numbers, but it's also the quality of the numbers and the quality of the tourism spend that we are able to attract. That's been a key factor. And that means not just developing infrastructure, but also developing software, programming content, and also really developing people. Because if you have good people with great service then I think you move into an entirely different level when it comes to tourism.
Because fundamental tourism is really about people. We're talking about people.
Yes.
Now, Marcio, it's quite important if you want to develop tourism that you have the support of the government. Now, you recently in May had a conference, a regional conference on tourism. What was your assessment as to how governments in this region have responded to making tourism and travel a priority in their national economy?
Amrita, this region of the world is where probably have governments most aware of the importance of tourism. If people here feel that it still is not enough, you can imagine how difficult it is in other parts of the world. Because here in this region, we've seen tourism growing very fast, international tourism, and also domestic tourism, which is also a very important component of tourism and economically more important than international tourism. So what has been happening in this part of the world very fast has called the attention of the society and government. Now, here it's less difficult to discuss with the highest levels of government the importance of tourism. In other parts of the world, the challenge is bigger. We must have, for the balanced, the right development of our sector, yes, a good interaction with government, a good interaction between government and the private sector, and also among different levels of government, central or federal or national government, with the local government, intermediate government. So our sector requires a very good level of governance, let's say, between public and private sector.
But sometimes between public and private sector, Gerald, is considered an area of weakness in some of the Asian countries. You're planning to set up now new hotels in Thailand and in Indonesia. What kind of institutional barriers do private sector companies like yours face when they're trying to actually build something in this region?
Well, I'd have to say from experience so far, we don't have major issues. The big issue, of course, is for companies to set up in places like China, for example, with your wholly owned foreign entity and the bureaucracy that you have. But I mean, that happens in every country, and you expect that you have that. I think the most important thing is that for a foreign company coming into an area or into a region is to have an empathy with that region, to try to understand what it's about. And particularly in the hotel business, because hotels are in a unique situation in that we really are part of the local community, we become part of the community. And I think that's extremely important for us. So I'd really turn this more our responsibility to ensure that we're coming in with an understanding that we have the right setup, that we have the right people in place, particularly when you go look for employment, in terms of employing people from the region, from the country, that you're getting involved in.
But before you actually set up places, in many of these countries, you need licenses and there are restrictions, and that can be quite difficult.
Well, you know, we're very lucky. Unlike the aviation business that we were talking about previously, we were talking about in another session, we don't have to get hotel rights to actually put a hotel in a city. You have to get your planning permission, fine, but at least you don't have the international and governmental regulation about setting up hotels. So as long as you comply with local building ordinances, and of course you have your own setup as well, and your own minimum standards. But I think it was very important for a company, say such as ours. You mentioned earlier that you know, we're a luxury, high-end company. So what can we do for
exactly.
for the people of the world? You know, the whole industry of travel and tourism really revolves around people's, what we said, freedom to travel and right to travel and desire to travel. And as soon as they become wealthy enough, they usually want to do that. And we feel that at our end of the business, and we've coined a phrase, that we want to create an environment within our hotels, particularly in tourist areas rather than say just corporate areas, where our guests can enjoy luxury without guilt, luxury without feeling guilty. And we've had this, this is still one of my own little dreams that I'd like to put forward at some stage. We've had discussions actually in Bali of all places, where we've already signed a management agreement for a hotel in a beach area in Bali, but we also have a possibility to go to Ubud, which is a beautiful, pristine, very delicate area from the point of view of the ecology and everything. But when we visited that site, we said, wow, we passed through a village on the way, and then we visited the actual site where we're going to have the hotel. And we came back afterwards, and we're setting up in Jumeirah at the moment what's called the Jumeirah Foundation, which would be a foundation from a charitable point of view. We said, wouldn't it be great to actually go back into that village, to talk to the villagers, to ask them what we can do in the 18 to 24 months it takes to build the hotel, to ensure that their people are employable. What training can we do? And we would fund this from the Jumeirah Foundation, not from the investor or the owner of the hotel, to ensure that perhaps we set up a small clinic, a classroom to teach English, to do training within the industry, so that when we open the hotel, we will be able to employ people from the local community. It means they don't have to drift to the big cities, they can stay in the hotel. And for us, this is really important, because then guests coming to stay will talk to the employees in the hotel. They will say, well, this is a good company. They made sure that we were available, we were trained and able to work in the hotel, and we benefit from that. And this is what I would say is, you can then enjoy your luxury without guilt, because you know as a customer, you're actually contributing to the well-being of the community.
You are, but you are at a limited basis, and you are dealing with so-called elite tourists. I'd like to ask Sebastian about that. I mean, there's a lot of discussion between mass and class. You want to say something?
No, I just wanted to make the point. When we look at the tourism development in the region, whilst I think the luxury segment is important, it should by no means be the only focus or the dominant focus, because you're seeing development across the whole spectrum. And one good example or evidence of that is really the growth of the low-cost carriers. And so it's clear that a whole new group and new segments of the Asian population are now empowered and able to travel. They have the means, and they may be looking for value for money kind of travel. And those are equally important segments from an overall tourism development strategy point of view. And I think each offers a different kind of economic cost-benefit analysis. And when we develop national or even regional tourism strategies, we have to be mindful of the spectrum.
Now, one of the interesting things which both of you raised was about domestic tourism. And with the global financial crisis, one actually saw that a lot of the growth in Asia and the Pacific was in domestic tourism and regional tourism. Now, are the needs, and I'll put that to you, Mari, are the needs of domestic tourists and foreign tourists quite different?
Not different, but it's just like the way when you market something, they have different needs. And I totally agree with my colleague from Singapore that, we have high-end tourism, but then we have it all the way down to the masses or the lower middle class who can now afford to travel because of low-cost budget carriers, but also hotels. Budget hotels. If I look at the growth of the hotel industry in Indonesia, it's at all levels, all the way down to the no-star hotels, as well as homestays. I think homestays is growing, and this is actually where, at least in the case of Indonesia, the large hotels are actually helping these homestays. What's the standard? How do you actually give service at that level? And that's become very popular. So I think we see, and a lot of domestic tourists actually like to stay at the low-cost hotels or even at homestays, because it's almost like I'm living in the city and my children do not even know what a live chicken looks like. It's kind of this urban middle-class phenomena. So they take back their kids to the villages to experience the lives of the people of Indonesia, so they learn about Indonesia. So I think one of you mentioned about the importance of tourism as a way to also learn about your country and be proud of your country. So that's also what we would like to be continuing to develop. And of course, we have a large domestic market. And ASEAN tourism, I think if you look at the growth of tourism in ASEAN, that's large, huge. And right now, last year was 82 million, I think. And out of that 82 million, 50% is actually intra-ASEAN. And so that's another part of the regional integration. You're getting to know each other, as ASEAN, and you become more, the identity of ASEAN becomes stronger.
We'll talk more about ASEAN in a second. I just want to ask you about this foreign investment and people coming in from outside to invest here. Maceo, how serious is the problem of leakage there? When investments are made here, there's a lot of criticism from anti-tourism advocates that actually the profits from big enterprises are siphoned off and actually go back overseas and don't benefit the local economies as much as they could.
Well, this is a discussion that we see all over the world. In some countries more, other countries or regions less. We don't have figures for that. but let's say that one of the public policies, one of the government policies that can be developed, and this in conjunction with the private sector, is how these investments, when the private sector comes to invest, whether it's a national investor or international investor, how more benefits can remain in that area, in that community, in that region. And let's say that countries with a larger economic base tend to keep more within their economies the benefits of investment. That is true, but that can be developed also. First, you have to have that, let's say, good problem of the investment. Then you deal with not then with the leakage, but at the same time you can start dealing with it so that the benefits can be more stay in a large
the
proportion.
national economy.
Yes.
And of course, foreign tourists are quite important as a means of foreign exchange for all the ASEAN countries. Sebastian, I wanted to ask you, but we were talking about mass and class. I mean, how you must come in contact with a lot of, say, backpacking tourists, and what is your experience as to how they contribute to the local economy? You're based in Cambodia, but you also have organizations in the whole region.
The backpackers are actually, in general, staying longer and spending actually a lot of money. They're looked down upon because they're not the high class often, but in the local communities, they're the ones who are contributing the most, buying at the local stalls, buying the local food, buying the local products, having this personal interaction, and they're the ones who are really building a bridge. There are some negative consequences to that because often they get too close and create problems, or they don't know how to react, because when you're so close to issues, for example, you see so many begging children, you see a crisis on the street, you don't know how to react, and what you do might be actually negative and dangerous. So it's important that these travelers are educated, informed, and told how to react when they see a situation so that they don't make it worse than it was. But they are really crucial for the local
and
people.
Amrita, I would say, as a father of a gap year student, I assure you to spend a lot of money, but not their own.
If I may augment what Sebastian and Marie said, I think it's, from our studies, it's quite clear. There is a growing segment of the tourism market which may choose to travel budget, may choose to stay in budget hotels, but in terms of their spend on shopping, on entertainment and experiences, they tend to be quite liberal, because that's their trade-off and how they want to work out the equation. So I think we should be quite clear that we should look at the aggregate and not just look at specific aspects of how they spend the dollar, because at the end of the day, for the region, it's important to be well positioned to appeal to the entire spectrum of tourists.
I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but I really want to take you up on something you said as well about this idea that foreigners come in, they invest in the country, they take all the profit out. I mean, just think, if somebody comes in to build a hotel, and usually it's on a management contract or a joint venture with a local investor, but just think of all the money that goes into the economy, not just from subsequent visitors, foreign visitors, but from building a hotel. All the furniture, all the bedding, everything that you do to build a property usually is sourced from within the local market. And it's not always imported. And more, Europe, for example, is importing goods for China and everything from countries like Thailand. So I think there's great benefit. And coming from a country like Ireland, which you know very well, it probably gets more FDI than most other countries in the European Union. And lots of citizens used to complain that profits from exports were tax-free and therefore they only provided jobs. But we all know the benefit of those jobs.
That's right. Now, talking about kind of ASEAN as a destination for tourists, aren't you all in the end competing against each other for the same market?
No, I think there's enough there and enough inbound tourism, and I think what we already have visa-free travel within ASEAN. And what we're trying to do next, in the next stage of the development of cooperation in ASEAN tourism, is basically two important issues. I think one is connectivity, airline connectivity, and this open skies by 2015, which is for ASEAN, as well as with, hopefully, with a number of our dialogue partners. Second, we're trying to develop the idea of an ASEAN common visa. So it's like a Schengen type visa to ease travel for non-ASEAN visitors to come to any entry point in ASEAN and then travel within ASEAN without requiring a visa. So that's kind of the idea, and we want to be able to develop ASEAN as a joint destination, basically,
yes,
so that you have choice.
The idea of an amazing, attractive ASEAN, AAA, a triple rating for tourists.
But I think it's very true. We have tremendous diversity in what we have within
So
ASEAN.
how do you keep your identity, though, within this diversity when you're attracting tourists?
Well, I don't think they're necessarily at odds, because I think part of what makes ASEAN what it is the individual identities of the different countries and even regions within the different countries. But then that comes together in this really colorful tapestry. But I want to give you a specific example of how I think ASEAN can develop in a manner that is holistic and as a region. And that's, for example, in cruise tourism. Cruise tourism is really a network product. You don't cruise to one point. You cruise to a region, you go to different points in the region for different kinds of experiences. And this is an area where we're working quite actively in ASEAN. Because if you look at the global tourism market, it's been growing at about 6% or so. It's about 18 million tourists in 2010. And yet in our part of the world, less than 10% of that global volume takes place in terms of tourism activities. So there's tremendous potential there. And several of the ASEAN countries are already looking at this as one of the ways we can do this. We can bring in the major liners. We can get them to have some very compelling routes and itineraries which will appeal, not just to tourists from Europe and the US, but also from within Asia. Because I think that desire for this form of tourism is also growing within Asia. So it's a great example of how ASEAN can collaborate.
And,
Yes, Marcia.
yes, what we see all over the world, not only in these regions, that people from the same region visit, more people from the same region visit the other countries in the region. That is 80%, overall 80% of the international arrivals take place in countries of the same region. So this is very important. And then only 20% go beyond their own region. So the fact there is no cannibalism in this. Tourism, international tourism and domestic tourism is growing. It's set to grow in the next decades. So this year we are going to reach 1 billion international arrivals all over the world. 1 billion. In 10 years' time, 1.4 billion. In 20 years' time, 1.8 billion. Now, in Southeast Asia, the countries will receive almost twice as many in 10 years' time, and 3 times more in 20 years' time. So international tourism is growing, not only from the long haul, but also from the region. And the more the countries cooperate, the better for them. In tourism, cooperation is key. Not only among the private sector, let's say the hotels that are there in the same destinations, yes, they compete, but it's to their interest to cooperate. The same applies to countries. It's to their interest to cooperate.
There's a lot of tourism within ASEAN, you were saying, Mari, as well as within Asia. I mean, China and India seem to have contributed to a lot of demand in this region. But one of the avowed aims of tourism and travel is actually job creation. And in this, I mean, how do you see that, Sebastian? I mean, from your perspective, are there enough jobs being created through the tourism and travel sector?
There's a fantastic opportunity, a great market there. We're running and we're training young people in the tourism industry, in the hospitality. We run restaurants. We're working with hotel chains to train young people. It's a great opportunity. The problems, there are many problems, of course, in terms of language, in terms of skills in general. But there's a huge demand because in the market, you don't have enough qualified staff for all the hotels opening. So there's a huge market, and there's a huge opportunity for training. The problem I see is there are opportunities in terms of markets, there are opportunities in terms of destinations, but the risk is that it opens up so fast that people are not ready and the communities are not ready. And we'll have tremendous problems. We saw Cambodia opening up really fast and then having to backpedal, saving the temples, the impact on children. The next is Myanmar. What's going to happen in Myanmar? So there's a tremendous risk in this rapid opening. Are we ready? And therefore, there's also a great opportunity. We can train and prepare young people.
Mari, you wanted to add something to
I
that,
wanted
because
to
one of
add-
the issues with jobs is often tourism attracts semi-skilled and seasonal and low-paid wage earners. Is that, how do you see that?
Yeah, I think what we want to have is not just work, but decent work. I think that's the whole idea. And I think one dimension of employment that is very important in tourism is that it employs the young. I think Indonesia has similar empiricals on this. Less than 50% are 25 years old, and 60 to 70% are women. So it's also supporting job opportunities for women, and you don't require a high education to be able to be trainable and trained on the job in tourism. So that's the other advantage. But how do we make sure they get decent work? I think it's a combination of training, proper training, and that's not just government or local government, it's also private sector in cooperation with the private sector. And that's where I think the importance of standards, creating standards, whether it's for the job qualification or even for the pay. I think the ILO study actually shows that women are still being paid 43% compared to men. 40% less.
Less than
yeah. So that's not decent, right? So we really need to make sure that that it's decent work and permanent work. Yeah, that's the other thing, and that's where the role of the private sector, the corporations, and especially if you're a hotel chain, you have hotels everywhere in a particular location. You can shift them around and upgrade them, right? They can.
And I'm sure, as Gerald said, I mean, their hotel is obviously training a lot of staff, and so is the Singapore government investing a lot in training of in the tourism
Well,
sector.
I think we'd be a good example where we obviously have an issue of how to manage our limited manpower available for this. But it's absolutely true that through the tourism and the spin-offs of tourism, you create some very good jobs and very meaningful, not just short-term careers, but long-term career aspirations can be fulfilled for young people. So what we have emphasized, and to just augment some of the points that we made, certainly skills. We need the training. We need to make sure our people are well equipped in order to take on some of these jobs and be able to perform them at a higher level. The second is productivity, because productivity, in a way, is an important factor that will underpin the level of compensation that you can offer and how competitive the business will be in providing those services. So productivity, which means not just skills level, but also how an organization conducts its business, is an important part of it. And the other part that we have increasingly sought to emphasize is flexibility in work arrangements. So for example, women in Singapore, one of the things is some decide to stop work when they have family responsibilities. The question then is, can our work practices be more flexible in order to draw them back on a part-time basis in the first instance? And that means higher participation rate and overall more resources for economic growth and tourism development.
Marcia, one of the problems that I see with the tourism sector is the fact that it is very vulnerable and susceptible to shocks, be it a financial crisis, be it a health scare like SARS, swine flu, bird flu. It's also very susceptible to fuel, fluctuating in fuel prices. How does one make this sector actually more resilient to cope with these volatilities?
Yes, it's vulnerable but extremely resilient as well, because it recovers very fast. And we've seen that throughout, let's say, the last decade, when we had all types of situations. And tourism has recovered very, very quickly. Sometimes we have an international crisis, then domestic tourism is there, as you mentioned earlier, to give support to the existing businesses and jobs. Sometimes there are man-made situations, and then it comes back very fast. The young people who travel, they are more daring. They When there are situations, they still remain there, they go, etc. So our sector, yes, it's vulnerable, but it recovers very, very fast. Now, I would like just to go back to the previous discussion to give two dimensions to that, if I may. One is that our sector is not only a sector that employs low-skilled people. We employ from low to high-skilled people, like an airplane pilot. So we have all types of people in our sector, and yes, we have to increase the productivity of them all. And we have to make conditions, as the minister said, to have people on a permanent basis. Not only that they work in our sector, but they make their career in our sector. Now, the other aspect I would like to mention is that our sector is not only the important entrance door for the youth and women in the labor market, but also for entrepreneurial talents. Very, very open to entrepreneurial talents because we have very few barriers, technical and capital barriers of entrance into our sector. So most, or I don't know if most, but in many, really many big enterprises that you see in countries, international enterprises, they started a few decades ago with one person or two investors together in a small business, and that grew very fast. So our sector has that capacity.
Potential. Talking about entrepreneurship, obviously at the national level, at various levels, there's a great attempt to make this growth in tourism sustainable. You gave the example of your organization as well. But how difficult is it to regulate within the tourism sector, especially in countries where it's really important to make quick profits, to see that tourism takes place at the local level, local tour operators, local hotels, in a sustainable, environmentally friendly manner?
It would always come locally first, because usually when some country or a place wants to set itself up as a destination, it comes from the local people because they know what they have to offer. They're aware they might have something to offer. That is very important. And I would say if you talk about regulation, the most important thing for all of us, and the Minister mentioned it earlier, and the World Economic Forum on the Aviation, Travel and Tourism Agendas Council has been working very strongly on trying to introduce the whole concept of a common platform for electronic visas on a worldwide basis, on an international basis, so that ultimately security will be enhanced, but also travel will be facilitated. This part of regulation is really important to make tourism work. And the other side that I see as a hotelier, but is really vital for us, is that every country adopts an open skies policy. As I said earlier, we don't need hotel rights to go into a place. Why should an airline need traffic rights? And I think that ultimately this is coming, this will come. Even when you talk about the budget airlines flying, we have found as well within the hotel business that people often fly a budget airline to get to a destination, especially short haul, but they don't necessarily want to stay in the budget property.
Yes.
And just finally, to put that part to rest as well, we've seen a place like Dubai, for example, which started very much like, say, Hong Kong and Singapore at the high end with hotels. But now we have the full spectrum of hotels, from premier end budget hotels right up to our own within our company.
If we're talking about open skies, and one of the statistics that I read is that in Angkor Wat saw a 45% increase of tourists within the first quarter of this year. And the local governor says it was only due to the fact that they had a lot of budget airlines coming in, flying direct into the province, and that gave them tourists with 640,000 in the first quarter of this year. And that just explains what a difference then flights can make. Now, in the final bit, we just have a few minutes left before we throw the debate open to the floor. I want to ask you about one of the most negative aspects of tourism, and that is actually tourism which is unwelcome, sex tourism, preying on young people, what you mentioned, Sebastian, on children, on pedophilia as a problem within the tourism sector. What can be done to combat that? What has been done to combat that?
That's not a segment of tourism, sex tourism. That's a crime. That's not tourism.
Agree.
Well, totally. Thank you. Thank you. Very well put, yes.
So, well, as you know, there is this ECPAT code that's been around on code of conduct against sexual exploitation of minors. I just wanted to make sure I got the title right. And that code is something which is governments have subscribed to it. The hotel industry has subscribed to it. So I think there's a prevention and socialization component. And it is a crime. In our country, it's punishable, has very strong sanctions and strong punishment. So there has to be cooperation with the law enforcement, sharing of information, and actual enforcement. I was told that in Germany recently, previously, if you are accused of this crime abroad, they can't try you in Germany, but now you can. So, you know, the deterrent side of it has to be there too. And I think the prevention side is, of course, the most important. How do we make aware the hotels and the people working in the hotels to watch out for certain kinds of behavior, to prevent it and to prohibit it? Yeah? And I think you can never totally 100% prevent it, because at the end of the day, what governments and industry can do to cooperate and to adhere to the conduct and implement it is only half of the story, right? The other half is the actual behavior of the tourists themselves. Now, how do we address that? That's, I think, another challenge in itself. And even if they don't go to the hotels, they can still go to other places where we cannot monitor. And here, I think in Indonesia, what we have done with both the child exploitation issue as well as human trafficking is to develop what we call neighborhood watch. It's actually the same issue with the security, you know, on the terrorist bombing. The neighborhoods have to be informed and socialized, you know, what kind of unusual behavior or unusual patterns of people moving in and out that you need to watch out for, and then you know, have some kind of reporting mechanism. So this is some of the things we're trying, because it is a crime that we have to address very seriously. Oh, I would like to add one more thing. In 2009, we alleviated this issue to the national level, in the sense that we created a ministry. The Ministry of Women Empowerment is now called the Ministry of Women Empowerment and Child Protection. So, you know, it is a very...
In fact, Sebastian, you have an organization as well, which is called Child Safe. But I'm afraid at this point we have to end the formal part of the debate, and I'd like to invite questions from the floor. So if there are any kind of issues that we've not been able to touch, obviously time has gone very quickly, you're most welcome to raise it. I would suggest that anyone who has a question or a comment should kind of raise their hand and address the question specifically to a panelist if it's a question. And if it's not a question, it's just a comment, try and keep it as brief as possible. We have about 9 minutes for questions and answers. Who would like to start? The gentleman here.
Oh, sorry. You talked a lot about tourism and the importance.
Do you want to identify yourself, please?
Jimmy Essing from UBM Asia. You talked a lot about tourism, importance of tourism. What about trade travel, business travel? How do you see the importance of business travel, and what do you do to promote it, and especially to the ministers of Indonesia and Singapore?
Do you want to address it to any specific person? Because from what I read, it's 74.
The two ministers?
The two. 74% I think is leisure tourism, and 24% is corporate tourism. So if you'd like to...
Yes. Well, first, when it's the definition of tourism encompasses business travel and also leisure travel. So that's a very important definition to start with, so that we don't say, well, business is travel and leisure is tourism. No. Business travel is tourism. There's that to start with that definition. And then internationally, overall, it's 85% of leisure, visiting friends and relatives, and etc. And then 15% is business
travel. Okay, Shirley, you wanted to add to that?
What we call the BT MICE segment, business traveler with meetings, incentives, conventions, and exhibitions, is a core part of our tourism strategy. And in fact, if you look at Singapore, you'll find that whilst the sort of pure leisure travelers and family and free and easy travelers are an important part, this component relating to business travel, trade fairs, etc., is very important and growing in Singapore. We've developed the infrastructure to support it, whether it's in terms of exhibition spaces, convention halls, etc. We're continuing to grow that. And we also have very targeted programs aimed at attracting more of such events to Singapore. It's called Be in Singapore, Business Events in Singapore. And this is one of the things that our Singapore Tourism Board works on very actively with international partners. So it's a core part of our strategy.
I would like to say as well that I think that business travel usually leads to leisure travel, especially when people come on conferences, exhibitions, they always come back. That's a very important segment.
I'd just like to add that I think it's now MICE, as we call it, is actually now called business tourism. We are also promoting it, and I think what is important is making sure the visa issue is addressed. So like the APEC business travel card as a regional initiative, I think that's been really well received. And I think ASEAN tourism ministers are thinking about how we can add the other ASEAN countries who are not members of APEC as part of that, because it's already running. Second is how does the government contribute by making sure that ease of goods moving in and out, because for exhibitions goods come in temporarily and then they can go out again easily. So facilitating that and providing incentives like providing the culture performance and so on. These are some of the things that we are doing.
Thank you. The gentleman in the brown jacket.
Etihad Airways, Abu Dhabi. One question for the two ministers. The World Economic Forum Travel and Tourism Index 2011 gave a very mixed picture of the Asian countries in terms of rating, with Singapore coming at number 10 and Cambodia at 109. What do you think, ministers, could the Asian countries be doing more of to actually improve that rating?
Which one do you understand?
I think the fact that we are all at different stages of development economically is a factor. So we cannot disregard that. So ratings are ratings. But at the end of the day, when you approach it as a region, I think the key elements would be capacity building, because we first need to make sure that our people are trained and have the skills and the ability to meaningfully participate in tourism activities. Not just as employees, but potentially also as employers or entrepreneurs. I think that's an important part we should not ignore, because there's a lot of local tourism initiatives that are needed. I think beyond that then is about really creating more capacity for investments in the infrastructure. So it's not just hotels, but all the other enabling infrastructure, so that access to and the experience of the attractions that are within these countries can be enhanced. And I would say the last element which we think is critical, and the correlations are time and again proven, is connectivity, and specifically air connectivity. The more we can build on it, and that's something that within ASEAN we've been growing, and we're continuing to grow as part of a regional strategy, that I think will be one of the surest ways we can enhance the tourism development in the region in all parts.
I would like to just add, I agree with all the points made by my Singapore colleague. The one, if you look at the way the ratings are done, one of the biggest downside on why we have some of these countries have low scores is infrastructure. So when you have the destination, attractive destination, it's not just not accessible because of the airline connectivity issue, but also the infrastructure in that particular place. So I think infrastructure would be another area for cooperation and investment opportunity, actually. And I think if we're trying to, especially if we're trying to promote ASEAN as a joint destination, having the infrastructure issue addressed will ensure greater integration within ASEAN, give you accessibility to many places in ASEAN, and it's also employment generation at the same time, and can bring in remote areas, more remote areas, as a tourist destination.
I think also, as Sebastian said earlier, was talking about, it really is important that we in the more developed areas of tourism try to help with vocational education and training in places like Cambodia. We all know any hotel will need about 500 people just to get it going, which is great for employment, but creates a huge challenge, I think, for vocational education.
But I would just add one point. For an investor, for a company looking at tourism opportunities in the region, taking a regional view will, I think, mitigate risks and create greater opportunities. So if you're looking at a single point, I agree the risk factors are greater, but if you take a regional strategy, then you will find greater scope to invest and grow the business.
The gentleman in the orange tie.
Martin Craigs, Pata, based here in Bangkok. Can I just come up with one comment that links these questions? your audience, which is, I know, obviously German-based, are actually seem to be voting in Europe against the growth of tourism in Asia because of your government's taxation policy. As you've heard, tourism is seen and travel to have a very benign effect on society here. So I think it would be important that the panel reinforce that with examples, as they've already touched on, about the job creation, rather than the unreasonable tax, which in the long run will hurt European employment, because Airbus certainly want to sell more aircraft here. If the panel could comment, I'd be very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman in the red shirt? Oh, sorry. The gentleman in the blue shirt.
Thank you. Simon Cooper. I'm president of Marriott International for Asia Pacific. I really want to ask Gerald about his site in the boot because I'm looking for a good one, but I can't do that. Minister Iswaran, I think I and many others think that your integrated resorts is absolutely the best example of a government enabling great progress. And obviously Singapore has benefited tremendously from that strategy. But I think also there's we talked earlier about balance in tourism, and I know there's a bit of a social price. And if you could comment a little bit on that balance. I know that you've got twice as many Singaporeans gambling as you anticipated. And I think there's also a little bit of a kickback in terms of the migrant labor that you had to bring in. So how do you manage that in the sort of political way?
We'll just take one more question because we're running out of time, and then we'll get you to respond to that. The gentleman in the red shirt.
Klaus Lengefeld from GIZ, German International Cooperation Agency. I want to touch on two issues and maybe answers from the ministers and from WTO. This leakage issue you managed. It's the most stupid argument against tourism because there's not one sector in the world where the leakage is lower than in tourism. From an average package, we did some research on that, from an average package of 2 weeks, it's about 20% that stays in the country. If the airline is from the country like Thai, it's 40%. If you go to the fair trade Starbucks coffee and you buy €3 of coffee in Germany, it's 1 or 2 cents that goes to the producer of the coffee, so it's 99% leakage, but nobody points with a finger at Starbucks, and it's very much recognized as a fair trade company. What is the tourism industry making wrong? What should they do to promote this? And the second thing is profits. If you build a hotel in any place of the world, the break-even is between 10 and 15 years. There are some exceptions. Maldives is an exception, but so it's a long-term perspective. There's no short-term profits to take out. There's hardly any other business that waits so long to make profit from their investment. And also the profits of the airline industry is 0.5% of their revenue. The profits of TUI and the tour operators is less than 2%. So it's not really the profitable business, but you have to ask why this business is surviving and not pointing the finger at them, you are so profitable, you should bring it back. What can we do to raise the public image? Because this is a problem, because the government, our government, is not ready to invest in sustainable development through tourism, because it has this negative image. Thank you.
Thank you very much for both those comments. We'll get our ministers to respond to that. Iswaran, there was one particularly directed at you, and then whoever would like to respond to that. We'll keep it brief now because we're running out of time.
Thank you for your question on the integrated resorts. When we started on this, we were very clear. We had some very specific economic objectives. The term integrated resort is not a euphemism for casinos. I want to stress that because there were a key set of other facilities we expected these people to bring in as part of the investment. So whether it is to do with the meetings, convention space type facilities, the family entertainment, so we have Universal Studios, etc. Now specifically economically, they've done very well in terms of contribution to the economy, in terms of job creation. I think those have met, if not exceeded, our expectations. In terms of the social elements, I'm not sure that the number of Singaporeans, I don't think we really had an estimate of how many Singaporeans would go to the casinos. But I will say this, we have always been mindful of the social risks and the social implications. And this is something that we have therefore been at great pains to address, not just post the advent of these casinos, but even in the build-up. There was some very prolonged, detailed engagement of the community to first build a consensus as to what were the concerns and how we could address them. And what you see today in Singapore as part of this regime is a very elaborate an unprecedented social safeguards regime. And if I can just highlight a few of those elements to you, everybody has to pay, every Singaporean and permanent resident has to pay $100 as a levy each time they go into the casino. This is not a revenue-raising measure. It is more intended to deter impulse gambling. So if you have to fork out that $100 before you go in, presumably that will give you some pause. Beyond that, we have what we call family, self, and third-party exclusion regimes. In other words, family members can apply to a body set up by the government to exclude certain members of their family if it can be proven objectively that their gambling activities are causing harm to the family. And that would similarly apply to third-party regimes. In other words, it could be a creditor, it could be an employer who have similar concerns. Now, having said all that, it doesn't mean that it's a foolproof solution, and we are continuing to work at it. But fundamentally, our objective is to ensure that our economic goals are met, if not exceeded, whilst we mitigate to the best of our abilities social and any other consequences that we would consider as adverse.
Thank you, Ishwaran. And very briefly, Mari, if you can. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely agree with you. We need to work harder to dispel this negative image of leakages and negative side of tourism. I think I would say two responses to that. We need to do a better job of quantifying the impact, whether it's the jobs or the supply chain. I think we need to, if you look at tourism, the multiplier effect is incredible. You know, if you take the supply chain, it goes from the vegetable farmer that's benefiting all the way to the architect who's designing the beautiful hotels. So it's incredible, and that's what we need to quantify, the impact. So there's an economic impact, and there's a social and cultural impact also. You are proud if you have a beautiful location which is incorporating the culture or the local culture and so on. And we need to make that argument. This my second response would be that once you've got that, you've got to not talk in this room or talk amongst the converted. You've got to take it up to your leader, to your finance minister, which is what I would do. And we've got to take it in the regional agenda, and we've got to take it in the international agenda. That's why what Mexico has been able to achieve with the T20 in raising the tourism issue to the highest level as a driver for growth and creation of jobs, I think is a very important achievement this year.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run out of time here, so I can't take any more questions. Finally, I would just ask our panelists, each of you have 30 seconds to tell me what is the key message you want to leave the audience with. 30 seconds each of you, starting with you, Gerald.
Well, I think that first of all we have to recognise, it's very easy to say, especially going first, that tourism is a force for good. We can see cities like Rome, for example, that haven't been overrun, that have been preserved because tourists have asked the people, look, this is a great place, you must preserve it. And I think it's also something that will always be great for employment and will have great social benefits for communities around the world.
Thank you. Sebastian.
I think that with this rapid growth just now, we have a common responsibility to prepare the communities to absorb these incoming tourists, to prepare them to be ready for jobs, but also to face the risks that come with it. And the second is to prepare the tourists themselves to be child safe or community safe tourists, respectful of the places they go. And that's a lot of preparation and training that we all have to do together.
Thank you. Ishwaran?
I would say three things. One, I think the opportunity is clear, present, and significant. Second, I think in the region we need to continue to build capacity, which means people and infrastructure. And third, I think there's tremendous scope for collaboration between the public and private sector to realize the potential of tourism. So I think what I would say is there's great scope. Let's work together to make it happen.
Marcio?
We all work in one of the most fascinating economic and human activities in present times. And there is only scope for growth in this sector and to bring benefits to the whole mankind, to all parts of the world. And of course, with big numbers, we have growing responsibilities. They come together. So we have to find the right ways to bring the right benefits, that they are there, they are at hand, while minimizing the negative impacts that these activities can bring to the communities and to countries.
Thank you, and I always want the woman to have the last word. So, Mari, what would you like to say?
Well, I think we must make sure that the drums keep on rolling to say that tourism is an important driver for growth and creation of decent and permanent work. Second, to realize that potential, it needs national priority as well as regional and international prioritizing of this issue. And it needs a whole football team approach. It means the whole government, including at the highest level, needs to approach it to make sure that what we're getting is not quantity of number of tourists increasing, but quality tourism. And this needs the government to take a holistic approach and private-public partnership to ensure that outcome. And obviously involving the community and making sure that you are addressing the tourists themselves, how to behave, how to be environmentally responsible, and so on and so forth. And so I think that's should be our common platform and our common priority. And unless we do that, you'll have the quantity, but maybe you will not have the quality.
Thank you very much. Now, as we heard, the potential for tourism and travel is enormous, but we can't let ourselves be dazzled by sheer numbers. We have to focus on the quality of our growth. We have to make it long-term and sustainable. It's quite clear there's not one model for a country. Each country has to decide its own priorities and at the same time work in synergy so that they can lift the whole region. Now, we heard certain ideas, we've heard certain plans here. Now, if these are implemented, there's absolutely no doubt whatsoever in my mind that Asia and the Pacific, as well as ASEAN, will become the preferred destination for tourists from all over the world. Thank you very much to our panelists here. Thank you very much for all of you being at the World Economic Forum in Bangkok. And thank you very much, the audience, wherever you may be. This was a Deutsche Welle World Economic Forum debate. Really good to have you with us. Thank you very much.